knife. He has a knife.
Why does he want to hurt himself?
We don't know. He's the one who caused the accident.
Give me a backup. Hey, man! Let me see your hands! Let me see your hands, man! Stay right there! Drop the knife! Drop it!
Welcome to episode 14 of the Force Review. I'll be your host for the next few minutes. I'm an active patrol officer with 13 years of experience. Let's get to it. Today we're going to review an incident that has just been completely resolved. It's a good chance to take a look at the process a police shooting goes through, from shots fired to legal decisions. April 22nd, 2020, Los Angeles, California. 38-year-old Daniel Hernandez leaves his house driving a black Chevy Silverado. He accelerates to 70 miles per hour and rear-ends another vehicle on the road, a white Kia Forte. Then Mr. Hernandez sideswipes a gray Silverado, hits a gray Nissan Altima head-on, and then crashes into an RV parked along the road. LAPD officers Toni McBride and Shuhei Fuchigami are on patrol, responding to an unrelated call for service when they happen upon the scene of the collision.
Back now!
He has a knife. He has a knife.
Why does he want to hurt himself?
We don't know. He's the one who caused the accident.
Give me a backup.
Hey, if it's possible,
you just step out of your vehicle and go on the sidewalk. Right now. Yes, I need you to step out now. Go! Go! Go right now. Hold on.
Any unit in the vicinity, 13.
Partner, right now, we need to get cover.
Air unit supervisor 100.
Oh, everybody, go away! Que se mueva!
Is on with a knife, cutting himself. He's inside his vehicle.
Partner, do we have less people?
On the 32nd Street.
Do not move your car.
Stay out there.
Is there anybody in there?
25 years old, conscious.
Hey, partner, you might be running. Hey, man, let me see your hands. Let me see your hands, man. Stay right there. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop it. Drop it.
Officer needs help. All units. Officer needs help. 1006 20th Street. Officer needs help.
Put it out. Put it out. I got it.
Mr. Hernandez had been armed with a box cutter. Here's what Mr. Hernandez's sister had to say about the incident.
There could have been so many different things she could have done. And this should have been a de-escalation. He was in an accident.
A suspect armed with an edged weapon who approaches a police officer is a deadly force situation we have all seen played out in countless police body cam videos. But this situation raises two questions. Was Mr. Hernandez close enough to the officer to qualify as an imminent deadly threat during the first shot? And was he still an imminent deadly threat during the last shot? Police shootings in Los Angeles are normally investigated by the LA County District Attorney's Office. But at the time, the District Attorney was Jackie Lacey. DA Lacey had received campaign contributions from the Los Angeles Police Protective League. Jamie McBride, Officer Toni McBride's father, was an influential member of that organization, and so District Attorney Lacey recused herself, citing conflict of interest, and handed the investigation over to the California Department of Justice. The California DOJ recently released its entire 54-page report on the incident. The report lays out a summary of the incident, a scene description, evidence recovered, witness statements, medical examiner's findings, a summary of force science expert Dr. William Lewinsky's report, DOJ findings, applicable legal standards, analysis, and conclusion. I'm not going to go into detail on most of that. I've read the entire report and I'll summarize the incident for you in a few sentences. Mr. Hernandez leaves his house and drives down the street with methamphetamine in his system. He causes a traffic collision which results in serious injuries to some of the drivers. He retrieves a box cutter and causes superficial cuts on his wrists while inside his truck. He gets out of his truck and approaches Officer McBride holding the box cutter. Officer McBride gives Mr. Hernandez commands to drop the knife, which he ignores. Officer McBride backs up 10 feet as Mr. Hernandez approaches. Mr. Hernandez continues to approach and Officer McBride shoots him, her first shot being fired when Mr. Hernandez was 36 feet away. I'm going to focus our review of the California DOJ's report on the two questions I posed earlier. The first question was whether Mr. Hernandez was close enough to Officer McBride to pose an imminent deadly threat. The California DOJ enlisted the services of Dr. William Lewinsky to help answer this question. According to the report, Dr. Lewinsky is a leading behavioral scientist whose work has focused on the intensive study of human dynamics involved in high-stress, life-threatening encounters. According to Dr. Lewinsky, An average person can quickly close a distance between himself and another point about 40 feet away in under 3 seconds. Let's convert those units to something more familiar to see if that timing makes sense. So Dr. Lewinsky is claiming that the average person can sprint about 9 miles per hour for 3 seconds. This is a totally reasonable speed to assume Mr. Hernandez could travel. So at 36 feet, Officer McBride is going to have less than 3 seconds to react if Mr. Hernandez decides to sprint at her. Is that close enough for Officer McBride to believe the threat was imminent? The DOJ's report determined such a belief is objectively reasonable under the circumstances based on Hernandez's aggressive approach while armed with an edged weapon. Okay, so the first shot was legal. What about the next 5? The DOJ report seems to analyze the shots not based on each individual shot, but rather based on each volley of 2 shots. This is a reasonable way to analyze the situation based on the fact that each volley of 2 shots were so close together and the fact that many shooting courses, including the police academy that I went to, teach to fire in volleys of 2. So, analyzing the first 2 shots as one, the DOJ concluded they were legal based on the imminent threat Mr. Hernandez posed from 36 feet away as he walked towards Officer McBride with an edged weapon. Okay, that's it for the first 2 shots. Now let's watch the second volley of shots again.
Drop it!
Here was Mr. Hernandez when the first shot of the second volley was fired. He's crouched on his feet and hands, in a position to quickly charge if he wants to. The DOJ concluded that, because Hernandez appeared as if he was about to charge at Officer McBride and still held the knife in his right hand, the use of lethal force was a justified measure of self-defense. Okay, now for the last 2 shots. Let's take a look at those again.
Officer needs help. All units.
Here's Mr. Hernandez as Officer McBride is firing her 5th shot. The last 2 shots were the most criticized. The DOJ report said, after the 4th shot, Hernandez fell to the ground on his back but immediately continued to move and roll onto his left side toward V1, who remained incapacitated in her car approximately 26 feet away. Hernandez's movement suggested that he was again attempting to gain his footing by raising up on his left arm and leg. He was still holding the knife and other civilians stood nearby. Standing alone, without the analysis of Dr. Lewinsky, this shooting is 100% justifiable. The only thing we've cited from his report so far was that someone can travel 40 feet in under 3 seconds, and it doesn't take a doctor to figure that one out. A simple test in one's front yard would have proven the point. But Dr. Lewinsky's report does provide valuable insight into an officer's performance during a shooting, so we're going to take a look at his findings. He cites 3 performance elements involved in this shooting. The first is perception and response time. He says, the more complicated the visual or sensory task is, the longer it takes to perceive it and then react. An officer shooting at a moving person who is gauged in an unpredictable movement pattern is going to take longer to align their gun as they attempt to also read and predict the pattern of behavior. Again, it doesn't take a doctor to figure these things out. They can be grasped by anybody who thinks about their daily experiences, although the doctor does put them in fancy terms. Dr. Lewinsky is simply saying that more complicated tasks take longer to do. As it pertains to this situation, Dr. Lewinsky is saying that Mr. Hernandez's rolling, lateral movement took longer for Officer McBride to process and react to than his forward movement. Anybody who shoots knows that shooting a target moving sideways is harder to hit than a target coming towards you. Dr. Lewinsky also says, the greater the distance and the higher the need for accuracy, the more challenging the visual task of sighting and shooting a handgun is, and the longer it will usually take to sight and fire the gun, regardless of the skill or experience of the person. All he's saying is that shooting farther away is harder than shooting closer, and shooting accurately is harder than shooting inaccurately. He's also saying that this increased level of difficulty makes the task more time-consuming. With these points, Dr. Lewinsky is referring to the difficulty of the distance that Officer McBride had to shoot, 36 feet, at a moving target. He's also referring to Officer McBride's need to shoot accurately because of the innocent bystanders around her. In discussing his second human performance element, Dr. Lewinsky says, attention is a cognitive function that is involved in the activation and selection process of any cognitive or motor process. The focus of attention generally determines what a person can detect and react to. So here, Dr. Lewinsky is saying that a person can generally only perceive and react to what they are focused on. Again, this statement is rooted in everyday human experience. If you're focused on texting on your phone, You won't be able to react to that car braking in front of you. In Officer McBride's situation, she has two things on which she must focus: shooting accurately and assessing Mr. Hernandez's behavior. She switches between these objects of focus between each volley of shots. Traditional shooting technique teaches shooters to focus on their front sight, thus the target will be blurry. Once Officer McBride assesses Mr. Hernandez's behavior and makes a decision to shoot, it's going to take some time to acquire her sights and squeeze the trigger. During that time, she may not see any changes in his behavior. Dr. Lewinsky's last human performance element is called interceptive timing. I won't give you the complex language he uses, but he basically says that it's hard to shoot a target that's moving in an erratic manner. Thus, it's going to take a shooter a longer time to acquire their sights and take an accurate shot. He's referring to the increased difficulty of Officer McBride having to take those last two shots, where Mr. Hernandez is rolling to the side. He's saying that that increased level of difficulty makes it even harder for Officer McBride to detect changes in his behavior. Dr. Lewinsky provides a table which breaks down the timing of Officer McBride's shots and decision making. The first column gives the time of each shot, with 0 being the time of the first shot. The second column gives the interval between each shot. The fourth column is an estimation of the time it took Officer McBride to acquire her sights and discharge each shot. These estimates are based on the times between the 3 double taps in the second column. Dr. Lewinsky reasoned that Officer McBride spent all her time between the double taps acquiring her sights and shooting, and no time on decision making. The third column consists of approximation times of Officer McBride's decision making between each shot. These times were acquired by subtracting the amount of time it took her to acquire her sights and pull the trigger from the total time between each shot. Notice that the decision time between the double taps was 0. The fact that the amount of time between Officer McBride's double taps was very consistent lends credibility to the times noted in Dr. Lewinsky's table. Notice that her time between the last set of double taps was slightly longer than the first two, about 9/100ths of a second longer. This lends credibility to Dr. Lewinsky's assertion that shooting at a target moving erratically and laterally is harder and takes more time. So let's apply Dr. Lewinsky's table to Officer McBride's shooting and see if we can pinpoint the moments not of her shots, but rather the moments of her decisions to shoot. My video player is only accurate to the second, so it's going to be a rough approximation. Here's the decision moment before the first set of 2 shots. Here's the decision moment before the second set of shots. And here's the decision moment before the third set. This last frame shows Mr. Hernandez on his back, but remember, this is a paused, single moment in time. Mr. Hernandez was actually rolling during that moment, giving Officer McBride a reasonable concern that he would get to his feet. Also, let's not forget, Officer McBride is not just protecting herself, she also has a duty to protect the bystanders. In particular, the driver of the white Kia is 18 to 20 feet away from Mr. Hernandez when Officer McBride fires her last 2 shots. This driver is also very vulnerable because she was incapacitated from the crash. The DOJ report was criticized by some people who said that Dr. Lewinsky was not a reliable expert. I scoured the internet and I could not find any statements that point out anything wrong with Dr. Lewinsky's findings in this particular incident. They were simply criticizing the man in general. Having closely analyzed Dr. Lewinsky's findings myself, I found that most of his points were simply articulations of obvious facts. Shooting at distance is hard, shooting at a moving target is hard, people are capable of running at 9 miles per hour, and so forth. His table containing decision times and sight alignment times did contain some speculations, but the estimations were not a major step away from the facts. In any event, Dr. Lewinsky's analysis of this shooting is a footnote. It is not necessary for justification. So the DOJ concluded that the shooting was legal. That means Officer McBride will not be criminally prosecuted. But there were still 2 more avenues of punishment she had to face: department discipline and civil litigation. She could have still been fired and sued. The civil lawsuit was tossed out of court. The judge ruled that Officer McBride had not broken any clearly defined laws. Let's move on to the last thing: Officer McBride's potential discipline at the LAPD. Officer-involved shootings at the LAPD are heavily reviewed. Their Force Investigation Division investigates the incident and prepares a report. The Chief of Police reviews this report and prepares his analysis. The Office of the Inspector General reviews the incident and prepares an independent analysis. These 2 reviews are then sent to the Board of Police Commissioners, who analyze the incident and make a determination on whether the officer was in policy or out of policy. In Officer McBride's case, the Board of Police Commissioners found that Officer McBride's last 2 shots were out of policy. They said, It was not reasonable to believe that the threat presented by the subject prior to those rounds was an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, even if it could have become one in just a matter of seconds. Upon an out-of-policy finding by the Board of Police Commissioners, the incident undergoes further analysis within the department. In Officer McBride's case, the findings of the Board of Police Commissioners was eventually reversed, and Officer McBride was found to have acted within policy. This shooting illustrates that fine line which separates an imminent threat from a non-imminent one. Everybody is going to place that line at a slightly different point in the shooting. It's worth noting that every single one of Officer McBride's shots found their target, which was of vital importance with the swarm of onlookers in the background. Since the Board of Police Commissioners found Officer McBride's fourth shot in policy, but her fifth shot, which was fired 1.3 seconds after the fourth, out of policy, they are placing the line between imminence and non-imminence somewhere within that 1.3 seconds. At the point Officer McBride fires her final volley, Mr. Hernandez is 18 to 20 feet from the driver of the white Kia and rolling on the ground towards her. Using our estimated sprinting speed of 9 miles per hour, Mr. Hernandez could cover that distance in 1.35 seconds. That time frame qualifies as imminent, despite the Board of Police Commissioners' view. Sometimes, when you try too hard to save the suspect, you end up getting innocent people killed. But not only did the Board of Police Commissioners find Officer McBride shooting out of policy, their declaration that Mr. Hernandez was not an imminent threat is equivalent to saying that Officer McBride should be prosecuted for murder or manslaughter. That is a difficult thought to stomach. I've analyzed countless officer-involved shootings over the years, and I can tell you that Officer McBride handled the situation better than most cops would have. That is it for episode 14 of the Force Review. Tell me what you thought about this situation in the comments. How would you have handled it? If you have any questions about the analysis or disagree with our findings, let me know. I will respond to any questions or criticism. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one.